preparing and YouTubing. All right. Welcome, folks, to another Wednesday Wake Up. As I was just chatting with the folks just prior, uh, we are stumbled into uh, Luke chapter 16. And on the heels of chapter 15, where we had these three parables, this lost sheep, lost coin, lost son, and the fact that God pursues us relentlessly. So when something's lost, something's pursued, and something is found because God finds what God is looking for. And when He does, there's a celebration. So kind of keep that in the back of your mind. But that was kind of an easy three parables to wrap your mind around. Here comes another parable in chapter 16 that will throw you. It threw me. And so what I have is a little outline. I'm going to show you first, and then I'll read through God's word, and then we'll chew into that middle confusing part. Because I got to be honest with you, I could have easily gone, I ain't touching that because it's just too wonky. Because I don't know if I've ever heard someone preach on this passage. Certainly the tail end of it, when you can't serve God and wealth, everyone jumps all over that one. But this middle part where there seems to be dishonesty, there seems to be like cheating, and illegal stuff going on, and it seems to be commended, which is not aligned with our our knowledge of the heart of God. So that's why I want to take a dive in to see um, what we could extract out of here, because it's truth, and certainly God is not commending illegal stuff. So let's just take a look at the outline, and then we'll go. I'll take a dive on in from there. Let's go boom and then boom. All right. Ooh, let me go change this. You got your little happy faces in my way here. And have I? I'm sorry, let me just do this really quick. Make sure that I'm doing the speaker view so that we don't get confused. All right, cool. All right, so this is Luke chapter 16. Um, and yeah, I put in this little note of what brings God joy and what's his mission is saving the lost. So that's what you have to remember from Luke chapter 15. But just take a look through just at a high level. Here's the outline of chapter 16, 1 through 13. And this is again is a parable. It's not a an actual event, but this is a lesson that Jesus is trying to reveal in this parable, in this story. So there's a rich man, this hypothetical rich man. And by the way, this rich man is so rich that he not only is owed a bunch of wealth from a bunch of people that he works with, but he still has enough money to survive despite that, and pay a servant to manage all of his funds. So he has money to spare. And so he puts this manager in charge of his wealth. So the rich man brings charges against that manager because evidently that manager was not being a good steward of the master's money, the rich man's money. And this charges thing is kind of interesting. Diabolo is the word in there, and what does that sound like? Diabolos, which is translated devil, enemy. It's the same root of balo, to throw, but in other words, this is diabolical type of scheming that this manager is doing with his master's money, with the rich man's money. So we don't know if he's embezzling, he's doing something illegal, and he got caught. In other words, he's not trying to get away from it. He knew that he was doing something wrong. So the rich man brings charges against the manager, and the rich man says, "You will no longer be a steward of my wealth." And rather than just kicking him to the curb, he says, I want an accounting for everything that you've done with my money. All right. So just picture this. So now the manager knows he's been called out. He knows he's been doing wrong. And rather than just getting dismissed and going somewhere else, the rich man says, I want to know what you've been doing with my money. That's very important. I believe that's a turning point. All right. Step number three, manager creates a plan to secure his future. He says, shoot, I'm a white collar dude. I can't go, do backbreaking labor and dig. And I'm too proud to go beg on the street because I've been, working with money my whole life. So I have to figure out how to secure my future. And he says, I know what I'm going to do. There's a bunch of people that owe my master money. I'm going to make a deal with them so that they're happy, because so that they don't have to go pay back my master as much. So in other words, I'm using my master's wealth to my advantage. I'm going to tell them, don't worry about paying back all of it. Just pay back half of it or 80% of it. Don't worry about that. So that does two things. That uh, makes sure that those people now owe him, this dishonest manager. They owe him because it's an honor-based culture. And number two is that they become complicit in this illegal activity. So in other words, it's another thing for the manager to hold over these people's heads, to say, hey, not only do you remember what I did for you, please give me a job or a house, but also if you cross me, I'm just going to go tell my manager, the guy that I used to work for, how much more you owe him, and then you're going to have to shell out a whole bunch more of what you owe him. So they are now complicit. Pretty slick idea. Here's where it gets wonky. That was obviously a wrong thing to do, illegal on multiple things, but now the rich man commends the dishonest manager. He says, way to go. What? I mean, if you're that rich man, wouldn't you be going, dude, you robbed me again? Like you're going even worse here. And it doesn't just stop there. In verse number 8, Jesus agrees with him, and he says as much. He says, the unbelievers of this time are more shrewd or prudent or wise. That's a word in there, and it can be translated any of those. So the unbelievers of today are more shrewd, prudent, or wise than the believers of today. What? What? I'm on your side, Jesus. What are you talking about? That the non-believers are more slick and more cunning and clever than I am. And then he goes on to make it even more confusing. He teaches to use dishonest or worldly wealth. I mean, they could be translated either way. Dishonest or worldly wealth to gain friends and secure your future. Jesus, what are you talking about? Like, you're telling me to be dishonest so that I could secure my eternal future? That does that mean I could buy my way into heaven? No. All right, we'll chew on that. So those five, six, and seven is the thing, but don't worry, we'll get there. So now here's the tail end of it is a little bit easier to understand. He says whether you're a good or bad steward, the quantity of the wealth doesn't matter. So I'm paraphrasing this, but I think you'll see what I'm talking about when we get to verse 10. So what this is saying is you can't say, well, I don't give to the poor, I don't give to the church, but if I ever hit the lottery, man, who you'd be seeing money coming your way. And what Jesus is saying is, no, we wouldn't. Like you wouldn't give away money if you're tight with a little bit of money, you're gonna be tight with a lot of money. If you're generous with a little bit of money, you're gonna be generous with a lot of money. Being a good or bad steward is not a wallet issue, it's a heart issue. And that's what this verse number 10 is trying to tell us. And then, what is it? Verse number 11, bad stewards. So if you're a bad steward with worldly wealth, and this is why this worldly, dishonest word is kind of confusing. I like to term it as worldly wealth, like the coin of the realm, dollars and cents in U.S. terms. If you're not a good steward with the worldly wealth, then who can trust you with heavenly wealth, with things that are worth a lot more, with true wealth? So in other words, it's a rabbinic method of going from the lesser to the greater. So in verse 11 and 12 is kind of uses the same thing. In the same way, if you're a bad steward with someone else's money, who's going to trust you to have your own stuff? So saying kind of the same lesson there. So in other words, it's all about being a good steward with wealth and with things that are worthwhile in this world. And then of course, verse 13, you can't serve God and wealth. That's easy. We could chew into that. Let's hit the hard stuff. So let's just do a quick little reading of what it actually says in God's word rather than my silly paraphrasing. And you'll see what I'm saying here. So yeah, okay, let's just go. Then Jesus said to his disciples, there was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was squandering his property. By the way, squandering is the same word as prodigal, from the prodigal son up above. It uses the same word. So in other words, just crazy spending. So he was spending his money, maybe keeping some for himself. So he summoned him and said to him, What is this that I hear about you? Give me an accounting of your management, because you cannot be my manager any longer. Okay. Then the manager said to himself, what will I do now that my master is taking the position away from me? And not only that, like he's not only taking his job, not losing his job, he's losing his place to live, right? Because chances are he lived like our servants typically live, or ones that manage, they live on the premises of their master. And so he's not only losing his job, he's losing his housing, right? So it's a big deal. What will I do? My master's taking the position away from me. I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I have decided what to do so that when I am dismissed as a manager, people may welcome me into their homes. So, summoning his master's debtors one by one, he said to the first, how much do you owe my master? He answered, 100 jugs of olive oil. He said to him, take your bill, sit down quickly. Isn't that what con men always do? Like whenever you get a text from Pastor Chuck to say, quickly, could you go get a Apple gift card? I'm in a meeting. It's always a quick thing. It's always, so this is the first red flag, right? They says, sit down quickly and make it 50. Then he said to another, how much do you owe? He replied, 100 containers of wheat. He said to him, take your bill and make it 80. And his master commended. This is so in other words, that's the scheming thing. And now that this is that confusing part. And his master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly or cleverly or wisely. For the children of this age are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than the children of light. All right, so this is like the unbelievers, the children of light, or the believers. So Jesus is saying that the unbelievers figure out how to take care of the future better than the believers do. Weird. And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of dishonest wealth, so that when it is gone, they may welcome you into the eternal homes. Like, what? That's the other confusing part. Let me show you what NIV does here. It's maybe a little bit clearer. It says, I tell you, use worldly wealth. That's why I think worldly is more of an accurate translation, to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, so in other words, when that wealth is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Again, that confuses me because you're talking about earthly people having the ability to give me eternal stuff. That just doesn't work. But I think I have a reason as to why he said what he said. So whoever is faithful in little is faithful also in much. Whoever is dishonest in very little is dishonest in much. If when you have been faithful with the dishonest wealth, who will entrust you to true riches? No, I'm sorry. If then you have not been faithful with dishonest wealth or worldly wealth, who will entrust you with true riches? In other words, worldly versus heavenly. Who's going to trust you with the heavenly stuff if you can't even take care of the worldly stuff? And if you have not been faithful with what belongs to another, who will give you what is your own? Again, like if you can't be trusted with my stuff, why am I going to give you something else and trust that you're going to do something any better with it? No slave can serve two masters, for a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. All right, so let's dive into this whole piece. There's a couple of pieces that jump out. One is, the rich man commends the dishonest manager. How could he possibly commend him? And I think it sources back to this step number two, is that the rich man demanding and accounting. All right, so Jesus is not commending dishonesty. God is not commending dishonesty. I believe what he's trying to get through is to be a good steward, right? There's a lot of steward lessons down below, and I think that kind of gives us credence to say, all right, the center part is talking about what do I do with the stuff in this world, and that's why it's called dishonest wealth, but it could be called worldly wealth. It's unrighteous is the real translation there, right? So it's worldly is unrighteous. It's if I take a dollar, it's not righteous. Nothing righteous about a dollar bill. It's worldly. It's what we need in order to operate in this world. So the idea is, what do I do with that? And when the rich man demands an accounting, it echoes back to, we will eventually have to give an accounting for what we've done in this world. Like, yes, we're saved. Yes, if we truly believe that Jesus is the Christ, and we devote ourselves to trying to serve him to the best we can, and trying to shine him out of our lives to the best we can, yes, we have embraced that salvation. It's not earned. But we are still responsible for what we're doing with the stuff we have today. And that stuff includes this unrighteous dollar bill. It includes our time, it includes our talents, it includes everything that we've been blessed with to say, what are you doing with what I've given you? Which is kind of goes back to the if you're not a good steward with someone else's stuff, God's stuff, why would God trust you to give you more? Like to have you to put more responsibility on you to give you more stuff to deal with. And so this accounting is the turning point for this unrighteous man, this deceiving man. And so I think the reason why he's commended is because he took action. All right. It's so easy for us to say, well, I'll worry about that later. Like maybe on my deathbed, I'll say a cool little prayer. But I believe he's commended because we should all today say, shoot, I'm going to be asked for how I took care of God's stuff and how I took care of God's people. Maybe I should make a change now in order to ensure that more people get into heaven, that more people know about Jesus, that I reflect him more purely given the gifts that I've been given. And that I believe that's why he was commended. You take your own spin on it. And then here we go with Jesus agreeing with this. All right, so that's why now it's easier to see if he agrees with it. But then he gives this kind of the unbelievers are more shrewd or prudent or wise than believers. Here's the next lesson is that a good business person is going to do whatever they can in order to succeed, right? They're going to go to whatever lengths, whatever, even if it's a little bit on the shady side, a little bit in the gray area, they're going to do what they need to do. They're going to book that deal. They're going to, stay on the phone, even though the stewardess is saying, get off the phone. We're taking off now. If he's in the middle of closing the deal, it's a illustration I got from Skip Hedziger last night, right? So they will do whatever is necessary in order to assure their earthly future. Why don't we do the same as heavenly believers? To be so focused on being the people that Jesus wants us to be, of telling more people about him than the people that take care of their worldly stuff. And that's good, gets back to here. Like this is on the tail end of God's joy is saving the lost. So the convicting part of chapter 15 is if God gets so stinking happy whenever one person comes to him, why doesn't that become our motivation, our joy, our focus in this world to use the resources that God gave us to tell more people about Him? All right, that's kind of where we go. He's saying, like, listen, if the unbelievers can work so hard to figure out how they could secure their future, why don't believers work just as hard, if not harder, to secure their eternal future? That's where I think this goes. And then Jesus teaches, use dishonest or worldly wealth to gain friends, secure your future. This is where I think it gets confusing for me because like how can I do stuff with the worldly possessions that I have in order to secure my eternal future? And this is where I think you have to put on the worldly hat for a second. If you ask a worldly person, um, what like if you wanted to secure your forever, when does your forever end? And they'd probably say, last day I took a breath on this world, man. I'm gonna just get as much as I can out of this world before I die. All right. So that's where, use dishonest worldly wealth to gain friends to secure your future. What is the future? The future is until I die. All right, that's the worldly mindset. So you take that hat off and you put on our eternal and our divine mindset of we serve a God that is eternal. Um, what this is saying, I believe, is do what you can with the resources that you have today to to get to a point where you have introduced someone to Jesus so that when you go into your heavenly home, they welcome you. All right. So in other words, make heaven crowded, I think was a Charlie Kirk blurb that I just heard. Right. So that's kind of the bit is that use your earthly, unrighteous, whatever, dishonest possessions of today in order to secure an eternal future for those around you, for yourself included. that's where I thought we were going to go. Anyway, so that's the kind of this hardest little chunk in the middle, but I totally want to chat with you about what you thought about how confusing that is, and if this helped to clarify, or if you have any other thoughts that may have been popped into your noodle. So let's just go there, and after a little prayer. So Heavenly God, we thank you for your word. We thank you for confusing us and allowing us to dig into it. Please inspire us to see your truth and to understand how we should view our riches that we have today, and how our perspectives may need to change in order to be more aligned with yours. We love you, Lord. Amen.